The morning Mitchell Hawthorne intercepted a message that would bring federal agents to his doorstep began like countless others, with the stark reality of impending foreclosure staring back at him from yet another bank notice. But when his fingers, weathered from decades of working Montana soil, turned the dial of his grandfather's World War II-era radio, static gave way to a coded transmission that would not only save his family's century-old farm, but expose a forgotten intelligence network that had been operating in plain sight since the Cold War. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The frost-covered fields of Copper Falls, Montana, stretched endlessly beneath a steel-gray November sky as Mitchell Hawthorne stood in his grandfather's workshop, surrounded by relics of better days. At 68, his broad shoulders still carried the bearing of a Marine who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, but the weight of financial ruin had begun to bend even his formidable frame. The foreclosure notice from Pine Valley National Bank lay crumpled on the workbench beside him, its deadline circled in red: 30 days to pay $127,000 or lose the farm that had been in his family for 4 generations. Eleanor would have known what to do, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his silver hair as he thought of his late wife. She'd been the one who balanced the books, who navigated the complex world of agricultural subsidies and loan extensions. Since her passing, 3 years ago, the farm had slowly but steadily slipped toward insolvency. The drought of the previous summer had been the final blow, reducing his wheat harvest to a fraction of what he needed to meet his obligations. The workshop itself was a time capsule of Hawthorne family history. Tools hung on pegboards exactly where his grandfather Samuel had placed them decades ago. Boxes of spare parts, old military gear, and farming equipment lined the shelves. But it was the dusty Hallicrafter's S-38E shortwave radio in the corner that drew Mitch's attention that morning. His grandfather had been a radio operator during World War II, stationed in the Pacific Theater, and had maintained his passion for radio communications long after the war ended. "Might as well see if this old thing still works," Mitch said aloud, needing to distract himself from the crushing reality of his situation. He'd been meaning to restore the radio for years, a project he and Eleanor had often discussed but never found time to pursue. Now, with nothing but time and the grim prospect of losing everything, it seemed as good a task as any. He carefully removed the radio from its shelf, noting how well preserved it was despite decades of neglect. The wooden cabinet was scratched but solid, the metal faceplate tarnished but intact. Mitch carried it to his workbench and began the methodical process of cleaning and inspection that his grandfather had taught him so many years ago. The morning passed quietly as he worked, the familiar rhythm of restoration providing temporary relief from his financial worries. He cleaned contacts, replaced corroded wires, and carefully tested each component. His military training in electronics, combined with years of maintaining farm equipment, served him well. By early afternoon, he was ready to attempt powering up the vintage receiver. The radio hummed to life with a satisfying glow of vacuum tubes. Static filled the workshop as Mitch slowly turned the tuning dial, searching for any signal that might penetrate the mountainous terrain surrounding Copper Falls. He moved through the familiar frequencies, local AM stations, ham radio operators exchanging weather reports, the occasional burst of distant music. Then at 765 MHz, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A series of precise rhythmic tones cut through the static. Not Morse code. Mitch would have recognized that immediately from his military days. This was something different, more complex. 5-digit groups repeated in a mechanical voice: 37291, 84563, 12907. The pattern continued for exactly 3 minutes before ending with a burst of electronic noise. Mitch's hand trembled slightly as he fine-tuned the frequency. He knew this type of transmission. During his service in Vietnam, he'd occasionally intercepted similar broadcasts, though he'd never been cleared to know their purpose. Number stations, they were called, mysterious shortwave broadcasts that intelligence agencies used to communicate with agents in the field. But this was 2023, not 1969. The Cold War had ended decades ago. Who was still broadcasting coded messages over shortwave radio? He grabbed a notepad and pencil, habits from his military days kicking in automatically. The transmission repeated on the hour, and this time Mitch transcribed every number group. As he wrote, he noticed something odd about the pattern. Every fifth group contained a sequence he recognized, 31894, his military service number. "That's impossible," he whispered, staring at the numbers. How could a random shortwave broadcast contain his personal service number? The implications sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't a random transmission he'd stumbled upon. Someone was sending a message that was meant, at least in part, for him. But who? And why now, after more than 50 years? Mitch spent the rest of the afternoon monitoring the frequency, documenting each transmission. The pattern remained consistent. Number groups broadcast on the hour, always containing his service number in every fifth position. As evening approached, he noticed another detail that made his hands shake as he wrote. The final group of each transmission wasn't random at all. It was a date, 11/30/2023. Today's date. The rational part of his mind insisted this had to be a coincidence. Perhaps he was misinterpreting the numbers, seeing patterns where none existed. The stress of impending foreclosure could be affecting his judgment. But the soldier in him, the part that had kept him alive through 2 tours in hostile territory, knew better. This was no coincidence. As darkness fell over Copper Falls, Mitch made a decision that would change everything. He would decode this message, whatever it took. His grandfather had left behind more than just a radio. There were boxes of old codebooks, military manuals, and cryptographic materials stored in the workshop's loft. If this message was meant for him, the key to understanding it might be somewhere in Mitchell Hawthorne's carefully preserved collection. He climbed the creaking ladder to the loft, flashlight in hand. Dust motes danced in the beam as he searched. Through boxes that hadn't been opened in decades, most contained routine military documentation, technical manuals, and personal correspondence. But in a small metal lockbox, secured with a combination lock that opened to his grandfather's birthday, Mitch found something extraordinary. A leather-bound notebook, its pages yellow with age, contained handwritten notes in his grandfather's precise script. The first page bore a title that made Mitch's heart race: Project Patriarch, Emergency Activation Protocols. Below it, A. Indote for MH. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Mitch sat down hard on the loft floor, the notebook trembling in his hands. His grandfather had been more than just a radio operator. The notebook detailed a clandestine network, established in the aftermath of World War II, designed to monitor and respond to specific types of threats. Sleeper agents, civilian assets, and former military personnel positioned across rural America, waiting for activation signals that most hoped would never come. The notebook included decryption keys, frequency schedules, and operational protocols. Most importantly, it contained a cipher that matched the structure of the numbers he'd been hearing all day. With growing excitement and dread, Mitch returned to his workbench and began the painstaking process of decoding the intercepted message. It took hours, referencing the notebook's cipher tables and working through multiple layers of encryption.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
His coffee grew cold as he worked, the only sounds in the workshop the scratch of pencil on paper and the periodic crackle of the radio still tuned to that mysterious frequency. Finally, as the clock neared midnight, the message revealed itself. Patriarch activation, Nest Sierra 7 compromised. Extract package Romeo coordinates follow. Handler contact 0600. Mitch stared at the decoded message, his mind racing. Patriarch, his grandfather's project. Nest Sierra 7, according to the notebook, that designated a secure site somewhere in the Montana mountains. But what was package Romeo? And who was the handler he was supposed to contact at 6 a.m.? The radio crackled again, this time with coordinates 47, 8761 N 114, Wo 529 W. Mitch quickly pulled up a topographical map of the area. The coordinates pointed to a location deep in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, about 60 miles from his farm. It was some of the most remote terrain in the lower 48 states, perfect for hiding something you didn't want found. As he contemplated the implications of what he'd discovered, headlights swept across the workshop windows. Unusual for this time of night on a rural Montana road. Mitch quickly stashed the notebook and his decryption work, military instincts taking over. He moved to the window and peered out cautiously. A black SUV had pulled into his driveway, followed by a second vehicle. 4 figures emerged, their movements too coordinated to be random visitors. Even in the darkness, Mitch could see the bulges of concealed weapons and the earpieces that marked them as something more than lost tourists. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the workshop door. 30 seconds to decide whether to face whatever this was head-on, or try to slip out the back and disappear into the night. The soldier in him wanted to run, to regroup and assess. But the farmer, the man who'd spent his entire life on this land, knew there was nowhere to go. Not anymore. The knock, when it came, was firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Hawthorne, federal agents, we need to speak with you." Mitch took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and opened the door. A woman in her 40s stood on his doorstep, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her suit was expensive, but practical, her eyes alert and intelligent. Behind, her 3 men in similar attire maintained a respectful but watchful distance. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm Agent Diane Novak, Central Intelligence Agency," she said, producing credentials. "We need to talk about the transmission you intercepted today." "I don't know what you're talking about," Mitch replied automatically, though. He knew the pretense was pointless. Agent Novak smiled slightly. "Mr. Hawthorne, we've been monitoring that frequency for decades, waiting for someone to activate the Patriarch protocol. Your grandfather's network was more extensive than even we knew. And now it seems you've inherited more than just his farm." She glanced past him into the workshop, her eyes taking in the restored radio, the maps, the barely concealed evidence of his evening's work. "May we come in? What I'm about to tell you concerns national security, your grandfather's legacy, and quite possibly the solution to your current financial difficulties." Mitch stood aside, allowing them to enter. As the agents filed into his grandfather's workshop, he realized that his desperate attempt to distract himself from foreclosure had instead unlocked a door to a world he never knew existed. The morning's bank notice seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the weight of secrets his grandfather had left behind. Agent Novak turned to face him, her expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Hawthorne, what do you know about your grandfather's service after World War II?" "He came home, started farming, raised a family," Mitch replied. "Never talked much about the war." "That's what he wanted everyone to believe," Novak said. "The truth is, Samuel Hawthorne never really left the intelligence community. He was part of something called Operation Echo Chamber, a network of civilian assets positioned across rural America. They were our early warning system during the Cold War, monitoring for specific types of threats that conventional intelligence might miss. She pulled out a tablet, showing him declassified documents bearing his grandfather's signature. Your grandfather wasn't just monitoring Soviet broadcasts. He was safeguarding something, multiple somethings, hidden across this region. Caches of documents, technology, and other assets too sensitive to keep in official facilities. The network went dormant after the Cold War, but the assets remained in place. Mitch felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. His grandfather, the quiet farmer who taught him to read weather patterns and repair tractors, had been living a double life all along. "And now?" he asked. "Now someone has activated the emergency protocols," Novak explained. "The transmission you intercepted wasn't random. It was meant for surviving members of the Patriarch network. Something at Site Sierra 7 has been compromised, and Package Romeo needs to be extracted before it falls into the wrong hands." "What's Package Romeo?" Mitch asked, though part of him already suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Novak hesitated, exchanging glances with her team. "It's a collection of documents and materials related to a joint US-Soviet program from the 1970s, a program that officially never existed. If these materials were to surface now, it could destabilize relations with multiple countries and expose operations that are still active." The weight of revelation settled over Mitch like a heavy blanket. His grandfather's secret life, the mysterious transmission, the federal agents in his workshop, it all pointed to something far larger than his personal problems. Yet amid the surreal nature of the situation, his practical farmer's mind latched onto one crucial detail. "You mentioned something about my financial difficulties," he said carefully. Novak nodded. The Patriarch network was established with contingency funds, accounts that have been accumulating interest for decades. Technically, as Samuel Hawthorne's heir and the one who responded to the activation signal, you're entitled to access these resources. But there's a condition. "There always is," Mitch muttered. "We need your help to retrieve Package Romeo," Novak continued. "The coordinates you decoded point to a location only accessible through private land, specifically through a series of old logging roads that cross your property. More importantly, the extraction protocols require someone with military experience and local knowledge, someone the network was designed to trust." Mitch looked around the workshop, at the radio still glowing softly in the corner, at the maps and codebooks that had consumed his evening. Outside, his failing farm stretched into the darkness, representing 4 generations of Hawthorne's sweat and toil. The foreclosure notice on his workbench seemed to mock him with its finality. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he said finally. Novak stepped closer, her voice lowering. "We're asking you to finish what your grandfather started. Help us retrieve Package Romeo, ensure the security of information that could impact national security, and in return, we'll ensure the Hawthorne farm remains in your family for generations to come." The choice, Mitch realized, wasn't really a choice at all. His grandfather had left him more than just a radio and a code book. He'd left him a responsibility, a secret legacy that had waited decades to be claimed. The intercepted message hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a summons. "When do we start?" Mitch asked. Novak smiled, relief evident in her expression. "The handler contact is scheduled for 0600. We have 6 hours to prepare. But first, I need to show you something else. Your grandfather left behind something that will help you understand exactly what we're dealing with." She gestured to one of her team members, who produced a sealed envelope marked with faded military stamps. "This was to be delivered to you only upon activation of the Patriarch Protocol. Your grandfather was very specific about the timing." Mitch took the envelope, his name written in his grandfather's distinctive handwriting across the front. As he broke the decades-old seal, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets were about to be revealed. The night was far from over, and the morning would bring a mission that would test everything he'd learned in both his military service and his years as a farmer. But for the first time in months, Mitch Hawthorne felt something other than despair about his future. His grandfather had trusted him with a legacy far more valuable than land or money. He'd trusted him with secrets that had shaped history and might yet shape the future. The farm would be saved, but more importantly, a duty would be fulfilled. As Agent Novak began outlining the operation ahead, Mitch opened his grandfather's letter, ready to finally understand the full scope of the inheritance that had been hidden in plain sight all along. The radio in the corner continued its soft, static whisper, a reminder that some messages wait decades to find their intended recipient. The letter trembled in Mitch's weathered hands as he unfolded the aged paper, his grandfather's precise handwriting, emerging from the past like a voice from the grave. Agent Novak and her team waited in respectful silence as he began to read, the workshop's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across decades of secrets about to be revealed. "Mitchell," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then the activation protocol has been triggered and you've discovered what I've kept hidden all these years. First, know that everything I did was to protect our family and our country. The burden I'm about to place on you is heavy, but I've watched you grow from a boy into a man of honor and strength. You're ready for this responsibility." Mitch glanced up at Agent Novak, who nodded encouragingly. He continued reading, his grandfather's words painting a picture of a world he'd never known existed beneath the surface of rural Montana life. The Patriarch Network was established in 1947, not as a response to the Soviets, as most believe, but because of something we discovered during the war. In the Pacific Theater, our forces stumbled upon evidence of a weapons program that predated modern governments, artifacts and documents that suggested advanced technology hidden for centuries. The Japanese had been searching for these caches, as had the Germans. We found them first. The workshop seemed to grow colder as Mitch absorbed this information. His grandfather's neat script continued, each word carefully chosen. These discoveries were too dangerous to centralize. We created Patriarch to distribute and protect these assets across America's heartland, hidden among farmers, mechanics, and small-town residents who could be trusted to guard secrets without drawing attention. The Hawthorne farm was chosen for its isolation and our family's military heritage. But we are merely custodians, not owners, of what lies beneath our soil. Agent Novak stepped forward. "Mr. Hawthorne, what your grandfather is describing aligns with classified reports from that era. The Patriarch Network was designed as a fail-safe. If our major intelligence centers were ever compromised, these rural caches would preserve critical information." Mitch returned to the letter, his hands steadier now as understanding began to dawn. Package Romeo isn't just documents, Mitchell. It's a collection of technical specifications and materials that several governments have been seeking for decades. During the 1970s, we discovered that Soviet agents had infiltrated parts of the network. Rather than risk exposure, we implemented new protocols and moved the most sensitive materials to Site Sierra 7. The location you decoded tonight. The letter went on to detail specific landmarks and access points that only someone intimately familiar with the local terrain would recognize. Mitch found himself nodding as his grandfather described hidden trails and geological markers that he'd explored as a boy, never realizing they were part of an elaborate security system. The activation signal you intercepted means someone has breached our security. You must retrieve Package Romeo before it falls into the wrong hands. Trust your military training, but remember, in this operation, local knowledge is your greatest asset. The mountains keep their own secrets, and you know them better than any outsider ever could. A hand-drawn map was folded within the letter, showing routes through the Bob Marshall wilderness that didn't appear on any official charts. Mitch recognized his grandfather's cartography skills, honed during wartime reconnaissance missions. Red marks indicated cache points, while blue lines showed extraction routes. "There's more," Agent Novak said as Mitch studied the map. "Show him the photographs." One of her team members produced a tablet displaying satellite imagery. These were taken 6 hours ago. Thermal signatures indicate at least 3 separate groups converging on the coordinates you decoded. We're not the only ones who intercepted that transmission. The implications hit Mitch like a physical blow. This wasn't just about retrieving old documents. It was a race against unknown adversaries who were already in motion. His military mind began calculating distances, terrain difficulties, and potential ambush points. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "We're not entirely certain," Novak admitted. "Could be foreign intelligence services, private military contractors, or even remnants of the original Soviet infiltration your grandfather mentioned. What we do know is they're well-equipped and they're not waiting for daylight." Mitch returned to the letter, finding his grandfather had anticipated this very scenario. "If multiple parties converge on Sierra 7, you must reach the secondary cache first. Coordinates 47, 8599 degree N, 114, 0867 degree W. This location contains countermeasures designed to protect the primary site. The activation phrase is, "Thunder rolls where eagles dare not fly." You'll understand when you arrive. The workshop had transformed from a sanctuary of memories into a tactical command center. Maps were spread across the workbench. Satellite feeds glowed on tablets, and Agent Novak's team had begun unpacking equipment cases that contained gear Mitch recognized from his military days. "We've prepared a support package," Novak explained, gesturing to the equipment. "Night vision, communications gear, cold weather tactical clothing. But your grandfather was right. Local knowledge will be more valuable than any technology we can provide." Mitch examined the gear, his trained eye noting the quality and sophistication of the equipment. "This is current military issue, special operations grade." "Your service record speaks for itself, Mr. Hawthorne. 2 tours in Vietnam, numerous commendations, expertise in mountain warfare. The agency has been aware of your capabilities for some time." The revelation that he'd been on the CIA's radar shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. How long had they been watching? Had they known about the Patriarch connection all along? "There's something else you should see," one of the agents said, pulling up another file on the tablet. "These are intercepted communications from the past. 48 hours. Someone has been broadcasting location queries about your farm specifically. The messages were in various languages, Russian, Mandarin, and others Mitch didn't recognize. But the intent was clear. Multiple parties were interested in the Hawthorne property and its potential connection to something larger. "They know about the network?" Mitch asked. "They suspect," Novak corrected. "The Patriarch files were never digitized, never entered into any electronic system. Your grandfather's generation understood that the best security was analog. Paper, records, physical maps, human memory. But someone has been piecing together fragments of information, following breadcrumbs that led them here." Mitch thought about the foreclosure notice still lying on his workbench. The bank pressure, was that part of this? Novak's expression answered before her words did. "We believe certain parties have been using economic warfare to flush out Patriarch assets. Farms facing foreclosure, families under financial pressure. It's a way to force sales and gain access to properties that might hide secrets." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What Mitch had thought was personal misfortune, the failed harvests, the denied loan extensions, the mounting debts, might have been orchestrated to force him off land that held secrets worth more than any agricultural yield. My grandfather's letter mentions countermeasures, Mitch said, forcing himself to focus on the immediate mission. What exactly are we dealing with? That's classified beyond my clearance, Novak admitted. But the fact that package Romeo has remained secure for decades suggests your grandfather implemented extraordinary safeguards. The secondary cache might contain the tools needed to ensure the primary site remains protected. Mitch stood, his decision crystallizing. The night outside was pitch black, but his internal clock, honed by decades of pre-dawn farm work, told him they had less than 5 hours until the scheduled handler contact. If they were going to reach the coordinates before the competition, they needed to move soon. I know a route that's not on any map, he said, tracing a line across the terrain with his finger. Old logging trails my grandfather showed me when I was 12. They connect to game paths that lead directly into the wilderness area. If we leave within the hour, we can reach the secondary cache before dawn. Agent Novak smiled, relief evident in her expression. This is why the protocol required a family member. Anyone can read coordinates, but only someone with generational knowledge of this land would know the hidden paths. As the team began final preparations, Mitch returned once more to his grandfather's letter. The final paragraphs contained personal, words meant only for him. Mitchell, I've watched you face adversity with the same quiet strength that saw me through the war. The farm has been our family's anchor, but it was always more than land and crops. It was a trust, a responsibility, to something greater than ourselves. Whatever happens, know that I am proud of the man you've become. The choices ahead won't be easy, but I have faith in your judgment. Remember, the greatest victories often come disguised as desperate circumstances. Mitch carefully folded the letter and placed it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. His grandfather had been right about so many things, including the nature of desperate circumstances. What had seemed like the end of everything, losing the farm to foreclosure, had instead revealed a larger purpose. Mr. Hawthorne, Agent, Novak called from across the workshop. We've detected movement on the perimeter sensors, 3 vehicles approaching from the east, running without lights. The peaceful Montana night was about to erupt into something far more dangerous. Mitch checked the action on the rifle Novak had provided, a military-grade weapon with advanced optics. His muscle memory from Vietnam kicked in, hands moving with practiced efficiency. They're early, he muttered, more to himself than the agents. Or we're running late, Novak countered. Either way, we need to move. Now! The team quickly packed essential gear into tactical backpacks. Mitch added his own contributions, topographical maps annotated by 3 generations of Hawthornes, a compass that had belonged to his grandfather, and most importantly, the hand-drawn map from the letter. As they prepared to leave the workshop, Mitch paused at the doorway, looking back at the space that had been his grandfather's sanctuary. The restored radio still glowed softly in the corner, its dials set to the frequency that had started this entire chain of events. On impulse, he grabbed an old journal from the shelf, his grandfather's maintenance log for the farm equipment. Its pages might contain more coded information they'd need. The night air bit with November cold as they exited through the workshop's rear door. Mitch led them along a path that wound through the apple orchard his grandmother had planted decades ago. The trees, gnarled with age, provided cover as they moved toward the northern property line. The vehicles have stopped, one of the agents reported, monitoring a handheld device. They're deploying on foot, moving toward the main house. Let them search, Mitch said quietly. By the time they realize we're gone, we'll have a 2-hour head start. They reached the edge of his property where an old barbed wire fence marked the boundary with Forest Service land. Beyond lay miles of wilderness, and somewhere in that vast expanse, secrets that had been hidden since the early days of the Cold War. As Mitch helped Agent Novak over the fence, she asked, "Did you ever suspect? All those years growing up here, did you have any idea what your grandfather was involved in?" He considered the question as they began their trek into the forest. There were moments. He'd disappear for days sometimes, said he was checking trap lines or surveying for the Forest Service. He had friends who'd visit, men who didn't look like farmers or locals, and he taught me things that seemed odd for a Montana rancher: codes, navigation by stars, how to move silently through terrain. The team fell into a tactical formation as they moved, with Mitch taking point as the one who knew the landscape. The forest seemed different at night, shadows playing tricks with perception, familiar landmarks transformed by darkness. But Mitch's internal compass remained true, guided by countless hunting trips and exploration with his grandfather. "There's something else in Grandfather's letter," he said as they paused to check their bearing. "A reference to when thunder rolls, where eagles dare not fly. It's an old Blackfeet saying about sacred places in these mountains, locations where even the bravest warriors wouldn't venture." "Sacred sites?" Novak asked. "More than that. The Blackfeet have oral traditions about sky visitors, ancient teachers who came from the stars. My grandfather was fascinated by these stories, spent time with tribal elders learning their history. I always thought it was just his interest in local culture." "But now," Novak prompted, "now I wonder if those legends were connected to what he was protecting. The letter mentions artifacts predating modern governments. What if the Patriarch Network wasn't just hiding Cold War secrets, but something much older?" The implications hung in the cold night air as they pressed onward. The terrain grew more challenging, forcing them to slow their pace. Mitch guided them along game trails invisible to outsiders, using landmarks his grandfather had taught him to recognize. A distinctive rock formation here, a lightning-scarred pine there. "Contact," one of the agents whispered urgently. "Thermal signatures, 2 o'clock, approximately 300 meters." The team froze, weapons ready. Through his night vision goggles, Mitch could see heat signatures moving through the trees, at least 6 figures maintaining tactical spacing. "They're paralleling our route," he observed quietly. "Either they've got exceptional tracking skills or they know where we're headed," Novak finished. The reality settled over the team like the mountain cold. This wasn't just a race to reach the cache. It was a strategic game where their opponents might have inside information. "There's another route," Mitch said after a moment's consideration. "More difficult, but it'll put the river between us and them. My grandfather called it the Devil's Staircase, a series of switchbacks. That'll take us higher into the mountains." "Will it get us to the coordinates?" Novak asked. "Eventually, but it'll add hours to our journey. Do it. Better to arrive late than not at all." They altered course, Mitch leading them away from the established trail and into rougher terrain. The Devil's Staircase lived up to its name, a brutal ascent that tested even their military conditioning. But it served its purpose, putting distance and elevation between them and their pursuers. As they climbed, Mitch found himself thinking about his grandfather's true legacy. Samuel Hawthorne hadn't just been protecting documents or artifacts. He'd been safeguarding knowledge that powerful forces had sought for generations. The farmer's life had been perfect cover for a deeper purpose. "Sir," one of the agents called softly, "I'm picking up encrypted transmissions. Multiple languages, but they're all converging on the same coordinates, the ones from your grandfather's letter." The secondary cache was compromised. Whatever element of surprise they'd hoped for was gone. "How far?" Novak asked Mitch. 2 miles, maybe less. But the terrain gets worse before it gets better. She made a decision quickly. "We push on. If the secondary cache contains countermeasures, as your grandfather indicated, we need to reach it before anyone else does." The final approach took them through a narrow canyon that Mitch remembered from childhood hunting trips. His grandfather had always avoided this area, claiming it was dangerous. Now he understood why. It was a natural choke point, perfect for an ambush. "Wait," he said, holding up a fist in the military signal for halt. Something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, the normal night sounds absent. A flare burst overhead. Turning night into day, they'd walked into a trap. "Cover!" Mitch shouted, diving behind a fallen log as gunfire erupted from the ridgeline above. The team scattered, finding whatever protection the terrain offered. Mitch's training kicked in, analyzing angles of fire, counting muzzle flashes, calculating their odds. "At least 8 shooters," he reported to Novak, who'd taken position beside him. "They've got the high ground." "Any way out?" she asked, returning fire with practiced precision. "One, but you're not going to like it. Try me." Mitch pointed to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. "That leads to an old mine shaft. Unstable as hell, but it connects to a series of caves that exit near the secondary cache coordinates." Another burst of gunfire chipped rock near their position. Their options were rapidly diminishing. "Lead the way," Novak ordered. The team provided covering fire as Mitch led them to the crevice. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and the darkness beyond promised unknown dangers. But it was their only chance. One by one, they entered the narrow passage, leaving the firefight behind. The sounds of combat faded as they moved deeper into the mountain, replaced by the eerie silence of underground spaces untouched for decades. Mitch's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing ancient mining equipment and support beams that looked ready to collapse at any moment. But as they progressed, he noticed something else. Symbols carved into the rock walls, markings, that matched images from his grandfather's notebook. "This isn't just a mine," he realized aloud. "It's part of the cache system." They emerged into a larger chamber where mining activity had clearly been abandoned in favor of something else. Metal storage containers lined the walls, each marked with military designations. In the center of the room stood a pedestal holding what appeared to be a complex mechanical device. "Thunder rolls where eagles dare not fly," Mitch repeated his grandfather's phrase. As the words left his mouth, the device activated. Lights flickered to life, and a low hum filled the chamber. A panel opened, revealing a keypad and a small screen displaying a single question. "What did the morning star say to the shepherd?" Mitch closed his eyes, searching his memory. His grandfather had told him bedtime stories as a child, tales that had seemed like simple folklore. But one story stood out, about a shepherd who spoke with the morning star and learned the secrets of navigation. "Follow the river home," he said clearly. The device accepted the passphrase. A larger panel opened, revealing a cache of documents, maps, and what appeared to be technical schematics unlike anything Mitch had ever seen. "Package Romeo?" Novak asked. "Part of it," Mitch confirmed, examining the materials. "But there's more here. Instructions for activating something called the quantum fence, apparently a defense system built into the landscape itself. Before they could investigate further, vibrations shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling as the sound of explosions echoed through the mine tunnels. "They're trying to blast their way in," one of the agents reported. "Then we need to activate these countermeasures now," Novak decided. "Mr. Hawthorne, can you make sense of these instructions?" Mitch spread the schematics across a dusty table. The diagrams showed a network of hidden installations throughout the mountains, connected by what appeared to be natural geological features. His grandfather had helped design a defense system that used the landscape itself as a weapon. "It's brilliant," he murmured, tracing the connections. "The entire mountain range is wired with resonance points. Activate them in the right sequence, and you can trigger avalanches, rock slides, even redirect underground water flows." Another explosion, closer this time. They were running out of time. "There's a control station," Mitch continued, finding the relevant diagram. half a mile from here, hidden in what looks like a Forest Service observation post, if we can reach it. We can lock down the entire area, Novak finished, prevent anyone from reaching the primary cache. The team quickly gathered the most critical documents from the cache, including the activation codes for the quantum fence. As they prepared to leave through a secondary tunnel marked on the mine's emergency exits, Mitch noticed one document he hadn't seen before, a personal letter addressed to him in his grandfather's handwriting. He grabbed it just as another explosion rocked the chamber, this one breaking through into an adjacent tunnel. Voices shouted. In Russian and Mandarin, their pursuers had found alternative routes into the mine system. Move, Novak commanded. The escape route took them through a labyrinth of old mining tunnels, guided by markings Mitch now recognized as navigational aids left by his grandfather. Each intersection was marked with subtle symbols that would be meaningless to anyone who hadn't been taught their significance. They emerged from the mine as dawn was breaking over the mountains. The Forest Service observation post stood on a nearby ridge, exactly where the schematics indicated. It looked abandoned, weather-beaten, a relic from an earlier era of wilderness management. But as they approached, Mitch noted details that didn't belong. Reinforced foundations, concealed antenna arrays, windows that were actually sophisticated sensors. His grandfather had helped create the perfect camouflage. Inside, beneath a false floor, they found the control room. Banks of equipment that looked decades old but hummed with hidden power. Mitch began entering the activation sequences while Novak's team established a defensive perimeter. "Mitch," Novak said urgently, "we've got multiple groups converging on this position, whatever you're going to do." "Almost there," he replied, fingers flying over controls that seemed intuitively familiar despite their complexity. The morning star's guidance, the shepherd's path, it all made sense now. His grandfather hadn't just been telling bedtime stories, he'd been preparing Mitch for this moment. The final sequence required biometric confirmation. Without hesitation, Mitch pressed his palm against a scanner. Decades-old technology recognized the Hawthorne genetic markers and accepted his authority. Outside, the mountains themselves seemed to come alive. Controlled avalanches blocked key passes. Underground streams were redirected to flood certain. U-valleys and electromagnetic pulses disabled electronic equipment across the region. The quantum fence activated, turning the natural landscape into an impenetrable barrier. But it was the final effect that truly amazed them. The primary cache, coordinates, the location everyone had been racing toward, simply vanished from all electronic maps and positioning systems. The mountain itself seemed to swallow the site, making it impossible to locate without the original analog knowledge passed down through the Patriarch network. "It's done," Mitch announced as the systems confirmed full activation. Through the observation post's windows, they could see the effects rippling across the landscape. Their pursuers, caught in the open, were being forced to retreat as nature itself turned against them. "Incredible," Novak breathed. "Your grandfather helped design all of this?" "Not just design," Mitch said, finally opening the personal letter he'd grabbed from the cache. "He improved it over decades. Listen to this." He read aloud from his grandfather's final message. "Mitchell, if you're reading this in the control room, then you've proven yourself worthy of our family's true inheritance. The Patriarch Network was never about hiding secrets. It was about preserving knowledge for the moment when humanity would be ready to receive it. The artifacts we've protected aren't weapons or treasure in the conventional sense. They're proof that human civilization is far older and more connected than mainstream history admits. The quantum fence doesn't just protect physical locations. It safeguards truths that could reshape our understanding of human origins and potential." The letter went on to explain that the foreclosure threat had been the trigger, a dead man's switch designed to activate if certain economic pressures were applied to patriarch families. The network had been under subtle attack for years, but the system had worked exactly as designed, identifying and activating the right inheritor at the crucial moment. "There's more," Mitch continued reading. "The primary cache contains archaeological evidence and technological specifications that prove ancient civilizations achieved a level of advancement we're only now beginning to rediscover. But this knowledge comes with responsibility. It must be shared gradually, carefully, to prevent the chaos that would come from too rapid a revelation." Agent Novak received a communication on her encrypted device. "Mitch, we're getting reports from across the region. The activation has triggered responses from other Patriarch sites. It seems your success here has awakened the entire network." Through the observation post's windows, the sun rose fully over the Montana mountains, painting the landscape in golden light. The same view his grandfather must have seen countless times while secretly maintaining humanity's hidden heritage. "What happens now?" Mitch asked. "Now," Novak replied, "we secure the primary cache and begin the process your grandfather envisioned. The world may not be ready for everything at once, but perhaps it's ready to begin learning the truth." Mitch looked out over his family's land, visible in the distance. The farm that had nearly been lost to foreclosure would now become something far more significant, a cornerstone in a network designed to shepherd humanity toward a deeper understanding of its own history. His grandfather's patient wisdom had preserved more than just artifacts or documents. He had preserved possibilities, chances for humanity to grow beyond its current limitations by reconnecting with knowledge that had been waiting in the shadows of rural America. As the team prepared for the next phase of their mission, Mitch felt the weight of his inheritance settle onto his shoulders. Not the burden of debt he'd carried that morning, but the responsibility of knowledge that could change the world. His grandfather had trusted him with this moment, had faith that when the time came, a farmer's son would have the wisdom to handle truths that had been hidden for generations. The radio message that had brought CIA agents to his door was just the beginning. The real transmission, the one that would eventually reach all of humanity, was yet to come. And Mitchell Hawthorne, veteran, farmer, and now guardian of ancient secrets, would help ensure it was received by a world finally ready to listen. The morning light revealed not just a new day, but a new chapter in human understanding, one that had been patiently waiting in the keeping of America's heartland, protected by ordinary people tasked with an extraordinary purpose. The activation was complete, but the true mission was just beginning. The secure communication center beneath the Forest Service observation post hummed with activity as encrypted messages poured in from across North America. Each transmission confirmed what Mitch Hawthorne had begun to suspect. His activation of the quantum fence had triggered a cascade effect throughout the Patriarch network, awakening dormant sites that had been silent for decades. "We're receiving authentication codes from 17 locations," reported Agent Martinez, one of Novak's team members who had taken position at the communications console. "Farmers in Kansas, a mechanic in Oregon, a librarian in Vermont, all civilian assets confirming they've maintained their assigned caches." Mitch stood before a large tactical display that was rapidly populating with markers across a map of the United States. Each point represented a guardian like himself, ordinary Americans who had inherited extraordinary responsibility. The scope of his grandfather's network was staggering. "This is remarkable," Agent Novak observed, studying the emerging pattern. "The distribution isn't random. These sites form a geometric pattern, a grid that covers the entire continent." Mitch examined the display more closely. She was right. The Patriarch sites weren't simply scattered across rural America. They were positioned with mathematical precision. His engineering background, developed through years of maintaining farm equipment and irrigation systems, recognized the elegant efficiency of the design. It's not just a grid, he realized, tracing connections between points. It's a resonance network. Each site amplifies and supports the others. My grandfather's notes mentioned harmonic frequencies. I thought he was talking about radio communications, but this is something else entirely. The revelation sparked a memory from his childhood. Samuel Hawthorne had owned a collection of tuning forks, claiming they helped him check the accuracy of radio equipment. But young Mitch had once caught his grandfather arranging them in specific patterns on a map, humming to himself as each fork vibrated in sequence. "Sir," Agent Martinez called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Site Delta 3 in South Dakota. They're reporting unusual seismic activity following their activation sequence." Novak moved quickly to the communication station. "Patch them through." The voice that came through the speakers belonged to an elderly woman who identified herself as Martha Redhawk, a retired schoolteacher whose family had maintained their patriarch site for 3 generations. "The old mine on our property has been sealed since 1959, she reported, her voice steady despite the circumstances. But after entering the activation code, the entire hillside began to shift. Something's emerging from underground, a structure that wasn't there yesterday. Similar reports began flooding in from other sites. In Appalachia, a coal miner described ancient chambers opening beneath long-abandoned shafts. A fishing boat captain in Maine reported underwater structures rising near his family's coastal property. The network wasn't just awakening, it was physically transforming the landscape. "The quantum fence isn't just a defensive system, Mitch," they said, understanding dawning. "It's an activation mechanism for something much larger." He returned to his grandfather's technical documents, spread across a planning table in the corner of the control room. The schematics took on new meaning as he considered them in light of the emerging pattern. What he had initially interpreted as individual defensive installations now appeared to be components of an integrated system spanning the continent. "Agent Novak," he called, "look at this correlation between the site distributions and known geological formations. The patriarch locations align perfectly with specific tectonic features: fault lines, mineral deposits, underground aquifers." Novak joined him at the table, her trained eye quickly grasping the implications. They're using the Earth itself as infrastructure. But for what purpose? Before Mitch could respond, the control room's main display flickered and changed. The tactical map was replaced by a complex diagram showing energy flows between patriarch sites. Lines of force connected the locations, creating a pattern that resembled both a neural network and a constellation map. "Incoming transmission," Martinez announced. "Source unknown, but it's using patriarch encryption protocols from..." He paused, double-checking his instruments. 1947. That's impossible. Those codes were retired before computerized encryption existed. "Put it through," Novak ordered. The speakers crackled with static before a voice emerged, clear, measured, and speaking with an accent Mitch couldn't quite place. "Authentication, Epsilon 77 November. This is Dr. Marcus Webb, Scientific Director of the original Patriarch Initiative. I've been waiting 76 years for this activation. Mr. Hawthorne, your grandfather would be proud." The control room fell silent. Novak recovered first. "Dr. Webb, our records show you died in 1952. A dry chuckle came through the speakers. "Records can be misleading, Agent Novak, especially when national security requires certain individuals to disappear. I've been in protective isolation, monitoring the network, waiting for the convergence Samuel Hawthorne predicted." "Where are you broadcasting from?" Mitch asked, his mind racing with questions. "The primary facility, what your grandfather called the Nexus. It's been in standby mode since the network was established. Your activation of the quantum fence has brought it back online. I'm uploading coordinates now, but I must warn you, We're not the only ones who've been waiting for this moment. The tactical display updated with a location deep in the Colorado Rockies, a region marked on official maps as a military testing range closed since the 1960s. But the satellite imagery that accompanied Webb's transmission showed something extraordinary. A massive underground complex built into the mountain itself. The artifacts your grandfather helped protect weren't just historical objects, Webb continued. They're components of a technology we discovered but couldn't fully understand with 1940s science. We needed time for human knowledge to advance, for the right generation to emerge. You're that generation, Mr. Hawthorne. Agent Martinez interrupted with urgent news. Ma'am, we're detecting multiple aircraft converging on our location, military transponders, but the identification codes don't match any known units. Novak's expression hardened. Dr. Webb, are you aware of hostile forces responding to the activation? More than aware, Webb replied grimly. The network has shadow guardians, groups who've been trying to co-opt Patriarch for their own purposes. They've infiltrated various agencies over the decades, waiting for this moment. You need to reach the Nexus before they do. The full activation sequence can only be completed from there. The observation post shuddered as the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder. Through the windows, Mitch could see 3 black aircraft circling their position, their unmarked fuselages reflecting the morning sun. We need an extraction plan, Novak declared, her team already moving to secure sensitive materials. There's an old Forest Service tunnel system, Mitch offered, recalling another of his grandfather's secrets. It connects this post to a series of ranger stations. One exit comes out near an abandoned airstrip about 5 miles north. Dr. Webb, Novak addressed the speakers while directing her team, we're going to need everything you can tell us about these shadow guardians. They call themselves the Prometheus Group, Webb explained, his transmission occasionally interrupted by static. Former military, intelligence operatives, corporate interests, all united by the belief that Patriarch technology should be weaponized rather than shared. They've been preparing for this day as long as we have. The helicopters were landing now, disgorging armed figures who moved with military precision toward the observation post. Mitch recognized their tactical formations. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. The tunnel entrance is hidden beneath the equipment storage room, he told Novak's team, leading them to a reinforced door marked with faded Forest Service insignia. My grandfather showed me this when I was 16, said it might be important someday. As they descended into the tunnel system, emergency lighting flickered to life, revealing concrete passages that stretched into darkness. The sound of forced entry echoed from above. Their pursuers had breached the observation post. Dr. Webb, Novak spoke into her encrypted communicator as they moved. What exactly are we protecting? What will happen if the Prometheus group reaches the Nexus first? The artifacts form a kind of technological Rosetta Stone, Webb replied, his signal weakening as they went deeper underground. They contain blueprints for sustainable energy systems, medical technologies that could eliminate most diseases, propulsion methods that would make interstellar travel feasible. But in the wrong hands, these same principles could create weapons that would make nuclear bombs look primitive. The implications staggered Mitch as he led the group through the branching tunnels. His grandfather hadn't just been protecting historical artifacts, he'd been safeguarding humanity's potential future. There's something else, Webb added, his voice now barely audible through increasing interference. The original artifacts weren't created by any known terrestrial civilization. The evidence suggests the transmission cut off completely. We've lost the signal, Martinez reported. Doesn't matter, Novak decided. We know what we need to do. Reach the Nexus, complete the activation, keep this technology out of the wrong hands. The tunnel system proved more extensive than even Mitch had realized. Side passages led to storage chambers filled with supplies, equipment caches, and what appeared to be emergency command centers. A complete underground network designed for long-term operations. "Your grandfather built all this?" Agent Chen asked, examining dates stamped on various equipment. "Not built," Mitch corrected, reading markings on the walls. "Expanded and maintained. These tunnels are much older. Look at the construction. Techniques. Some sections date back to the 1800s, maybe earlier." They emerged from the tunnels 2 hours later, exactly where Mitch had predicted. The abandoned airstrip stretched before them, its cracked runway partially reclaimed by mountain vegetation. But sitting at the far end, as if waiting for them, was a vintage DC-3 aircraft in surprisingly good condition. "That's impossible," Novak breathed. "This airstrip has been abandoned for decades." Mitch approached the aircraft, noting its unusual modifications, extra fuel tanks, upgraded engines, and what appeared to be advanced avionics that didn't match its 1940s exterior. A small metal plaque near the door read, "Maintained by the Brotherhood of Clouds." Another part of the network, he realized. Pilots who've been maintaining escape routes, transportation assets, all in preparation for this activation. Inside the aircraft, they found the cockpit powered up and ready, navigation systems already programmed with coordinates for Colorado. A handwritten note on the pilot's seat read, "For the Hawthorne Air, blue skies and tailwinds. Captain Sarah Mackenzie, Brotherhood of Clouds." "Can you fly this?" Novak asked Mitch. "I maintained aerial crop dusters for local farmers," he replied, settling into the pilot's seat. "Different scale, but same principles. My grandfather insisted I learn, said it might be important someday." As they prepared for takeoff, Agent Martinez monitored communications from the observation post. "The Prometheus group has discovered the tunnel system. They're in pursuit, but we've got at least a 30-minute lead." The old DC-3 roared to life, its engines surprisingly smooth despite their age. As Mitch taxied toward the runway, he noticed subtle modifications to the control surfaces. This aircraft had been extensively upgraded while maintaining its vintage appearance. They lifted off just as the first pursuit vehicles appeared at the airstrip's perimeter. The DC-3 climbed steadily into the morning sky, leaving Montana behind as they headed south toward Colorado and the mysterious Nexus facility. "Agent Novak," Mitch said once they reached cruising altitude, "there's something else in my grandfather's documents, references to something called the consciousness threshold." Any idea what that means?" Novak was quiet for a moment before responding. There were rumors in certain intelligence circles, theories that the Patriarch artifacts weren't just technological, that they were designed to test whether humanity had reached a certain level of social and spiritual development. The idea was that the technology would only fully activate when we were mature enough to use it responsibly. And the Prometheus group? They represent the opposite approach. They believe in forcing advancement through controlled application of power. It's the eternal debate, evolution versus revolution. The flight gave them time to review the materials they'd managed to save from the observation post. Mitch's grandfather's journal contained detailed notes about the Nexus facility, including security protocols and access requirements that hadn't been mentioned in the official documents. "Listen to this," Mitch read aloud. "The Nexus requires 3 keys for full activation. Knowledge, represented by the Guardian Network, wisdom, earned through generational stewardship, and unity, achieved when the network operates in harmony. Without all 3, the system remains dormant." "No, we have knowledge through the network activation," Novak reasoned. "Wisdom through your family's multi-generational involvement. But unity?" "The sites working together," Mitch suggested. "That pattern we saw forming on the tactical display, it looked like they were beginning to synchronize. Their discussion was interrupted by a proximity alarm. Two fighter jets had appeared on their radar, approaching fast from the east. Military aircraft, but they're not responding to standard identification requests, Martinez reported from the communication station. Prometheus Group must have military assets, Novak concluded. Can this plane outrun them? Not a chance, Mitch replied, scanning the instruments. But we might not have to. Check the defensive systems panel to your right. Novak examined the indicated panel, finding controls that definitely didn't belong on a 1940s aircraft. Electronic countermeasures, chaff dispensers, and something labeled Resonance Shield. Your grandfather's modifications. Or the Brotherhood of Clouds. Either way, we're about to find out if they work. The fighter jets closed to weapons, range, and Mitch saw missile lock warnings appear on an anachronistic heads-up display. Without hesitation, he activated the resonance shield. The effect was immediate and spectacular. A shimmer of energy enveloped the DC-3, and the incoming missiles veered off course, their guidance systems apparently scrambled. The fighter jets themselves seemed to lose orientation, breaking off their attack run in confusion. Whatever that was, it worked, Novak reported. They're falling back. Resonance technology, Mitch muttered, pieces falling into place. The same principles as the quantum fence, but applied to aircraft defense. My grandfather wasn't just protecting artifacts, he was field testing applications. The rest of the flight proceeded without incident, though they maintained vigilance. As they approached Colorado airspace, the landscape below transformed from plains to mountains, the Rockies rising majestically against the western sky. We're nearing the coordinates, Mitch announced, but I don't see any obvious facilities. Look for what's not there, Novak suggested, remembering lessons from her intelligence training. Camouflage at this scale requires making something appear natural. Mitch studied the terrain more carefully. Then he saw it. A valley that seemed too perfect, its contours slightly too regular. As they flew over, he noticed that what appeared to be natural shadows didn't shift with the sun's angle. There, he pointed, that entire valley is artificial. The mountains on either side have been modified to create natural walls. Following the coordinates precisely, they found a hidden runway carved into the mountainside, its surface camouflaged to look like natural rock from above. Only from their exact approach angle was it visible as a landing strip. Incredible engineering, Novak observed. This must have taken decades to construct. Or longer, Mitch replied, beginning their descent. Remember what Dr. Webb said about the tunnels predating modern construction. What if the Nexus wasn't built by the Patriarch program, but discovered and repurposed? The landing was smooth, the runway perfectly maintained despite its apparent abandonment. As they taxied toward what looked like a natural rock face, massive camouflage doors began to open, revealing a hangar that could have accommodated aircraft many times their size. Inside, they were greeted by an astonishing sight. The hangar held not just vintage aircraft, but vehicles and equipment spanning decades of technological development. It was a museum of transportation evolution, all apparently maintained in perfect working condition. As they disembarked, Dr. Marcus Webb emerged from a side entrance. He appeared to be in his 90s, but moved with surprising vitality. His eyes, sharp and alert, fixed immediately on Mitch. "Samuel's grandson," he said warmly. "You have his determination and Eleanor's wisdom in your eyes. Welcome to the Nexus." "Dr. Webb," Novak interjected professionally, "we need to secure this facility. The Prometheus Group is already here," Webb finished grimly. "Not in the Nexus itself, but they've established positions in the surrounding mountains. They can't breach our defenses directly, but they're trying to prevent the final activation sequence." He led them through a series of security checkpoints, each requiring increasingly sophisticated authentication methods. Biometric scanners gave way to DNA analyzers, and finally to devices that seemed to measure brainwave patterns. The architects of this facility understood that true security requires more than just physical barriers, Webb explained. It needs to verify the intentions of those seeking access. They emerged into a vast underground chamber that took Mitch's breath away. The space was dominated by a massive spherical structure suspended in the center, surrounded by concentric rings of advanced technology. Ancient-looking artifacts were integrated seamlessly with cutting-edge equipment, creating a fusion of archaeological wonder and futuristic laboratory. The Nexus Core, Webb announced, the central processing unit for the entire Patriarch network. Your grandfather helped calibrate its resonance patterns to match Earth's magnetic field variations. It's beautiful, Mitch whispered, approaching the sphere. As he drew closer, he felt a subtle vibration, as if the structure was humming just below the range of human hearing. The artifacts recovered during World War II were components of this system, Webb continued. We spent decades trying to understand how they fit together. Your grandfather had a unique insight. He realized they weren't just technological devices, but were designed to interface with human consciousness. Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Display screens showed multiple breach attempts at various perimeter locations. The Prometheus group is launching a coordinated assault, Webb reported, moving to a control console. They're testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. Can they get in? Novak asked, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Not through conventional means, Webb assured her, but they might try to prevent the final activation by targeting the external resonance points, the Patriarch sites that need to maintain synchronization. Mitch studied the displays showing the assault patterns. His military training recognized the tactics, probing attacks designed to force defenders to reveal their capabilities. They're not trying to breach the Nexus, he realized. They're trying to disrupt the network connections, if they can isolate us from the other sites. The activation sequence will fail, Webb confirmed. We need all sites operating in harmony to achieve the consciousness threshold. Then we need to complete the activation before they can interfere, Novak decided. What's required? Webb led them to a raised platform facing the spherical core. 3 distinct interface stations were arranged in a triangular pattern, each displaying complex symbols and energy patterns. The 3 keys, Webb explained, knowledge, wisdom, and unity. Mr. Hawthorne, as the activated guardian, you'll need to initiate the sequence. Agent Novak, your role is to maintain communication with the network sites, ensuring they remain synchronized. I'll handle the technical calibration. As they took their positions, Mitch felt the weight of generations pressing upon him. His grandfather had protected this moment, maintained faith that someday the world would be ready. Now it fell to him to complete that vision. Beginning activation sequence, Webb announced, his hands moving across holographic controls with practiced precision. The sphere began to pulse with internal light, patterns of energy flowing across its surface like living circuitry. Around them, the chamber filled with harmonics that seemed to resonate in their bones. Network sites responding, Novak reported from her station. 17 locations confirming synchronization. Wait, we're getting interference. The Prometheus group is jamming communications with 5 sites. We need at least 20 sites for minimum activation threshold, Webb warned. Can you clear the interference? Novak worked furiously at her console, rerouting signals and applying countermeasures. 3 sites back online. 4. There. 22 sites now synchronized. The sphere's pulsing intensified, and Mitch felt something stirring in. His consciousness, a connection forming not just with the technology, but with the other guardians across the network. He could sense their presence, their dedication, their hope for what this moment might bring. Knowledge key activated, Webb announced. Wisdom key engaging. Mr. Hawthorne, you need to initiate the Unity protocol. Mitch looked at his interface, suddenly understanding what was required. The Unity key wasn't about technology, it was about trust, about letting go of individual control and embracing collective purpose. He had to open himself to the network, to become a conduit for the combined will of all the Guardians. As he placed his hands on the interface, memories flooded through him, not just his own, but those of his grandfather, of all the patriarch Guardians who had maintained their vigil through decades of secrecy. He saw the original discovery of the artifacts, understood the terrible choice between sharing revolutionary knowledge and protecting humanity from its own immature impulses. Unity key activated, he managed to say as the connection deepened. The sphere blazed with brilliant light, and suddenly the entire chamber transformed. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing technical schematics, mathematical formulas, and designs for technologies that seemed to bridge science and magic. The consciousness threshold has been achieved, Webb announced, his voice filled with awe. The full library is unlocking. Around them, the displays revealed the true scope of what Patriarch had been protecting. Clean energy systems that could power cities from the planet's magnetic field. Medical technologies that worked with the body's natural healing capabilities. Transportation methods that manipulated space-time geometry. Agricultural techniques that could transform deserts into gardens. But more than technology, the displays showed a philosophy, a way of understanding humanity's place in a larger cosmic community. The artifacts hadn't been created by a single civilization, but were the result of collaboration between multiple species across vast distances and time periods. This is what they were afraid of, Mitch realized, watching the information unfold. Not just advanced technology, but proof that we're not alone, that cooperation across differences is the key to advancement. Damn, and that's exactly what the Prometheus group wants to prevent, Novak added. They profit from division, from conflict, from the current power structures. Alarms sounded again, more urgent this time. External displays showed a massive assault, beginning on the valley's defenses. The Prometheus group had abandoned subtlety and was throwing everything into a direct attack. They know the activation succeeded, Webb said grimly. Now they're trying to destroy the Nexus before this knowledge can be disseminated. Can the defenses hold? Novak asked. Long enough to complete the download to all network sites, Webb confirmed. Once the information is distributed across the Guardian network, it can't be suppressed. The question is whether... A massive explosion rocked the facility, causing displays to flicker momentarily. The Prometheus group had brought serious firepower. They're using bunker busters, Martinez reported from a tactical station. The mountain's natural protection is being compromised. Mitch felt the network connection in his mind, sensing the other Guardian's awareness of the situation. An idea formed, not just his own, but emerging from the collective consciousness of the network. The resonance shield, he said suddenly. If we can expand it from the Nexus, link it with all the active Patriarch sites. Create a continental defense grid, Webb completed the thought. Brilliant, but it would require tremendous power. We have it, Mitch insisted, understanding flowing through the network connection. The sites are positioned on geological power points. We're already tapped into the planet's magnetic field. We just need to synchronize the resonance. Without waiting for approval, he began implementing the protocol. Through the Unity interface, he could feel each Guardian responding, adjusting their local systems to match the harmonic frequency emanating from the Nexus. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A shimmering barrier expanded from the facility, spreading outward in concentric waves. As it reached the attacking forces, their weapon systems began to malfunction. Their vehicles stalled and electronic equipment failed. But more significantly, the resonance field carried information, the knowledge from the nexus flowing outward like ripples in a pond, reaching not just the Guardian sites, but broadcasting on frequencies that anyone with proper receiving equipment could detect. You're not just defending, Webb realized. You're disseminating, making it impossible to contain the information. My grandfather always said that knowledge wants to be free, Mitch replied, maintaining his focus on the network. Connection. We're just removing the barriers. Around the world, receivers began picking up the transmission. Amateur radio operators, research facilities, anyone monitoring the right frequencies suddenly had access to technological and philosophical insights that could transform human civilization. The Prometheus group's assault faltered as they realized their mission had already failed. The knowledge they'd sought to control or destroy was spreading beyond anyone's ability to contain it. It's done, Novak reported, monitoring global communications. The information is out there. Governments, universities, independent researchers, they're all receiving the data. Webb sagged with relief. Decades of vigilance finally validated. Your grandfather would be so proud, Mitchell. He always believed this day would come, that humanity would prove ready for this responsibility. As the immediate crisis passed, Mitch felt the network connection settling into a sustainable pattern. The Guardians would continue their roles, but now as teachers and guides rather than secret keepers. The transition wouldn't be easy. Such fundamental change never was, but the foundation had been laid. What happens now? He asked, looking at the holographic displays still showing the vast library of knowledge. Now, the real work begins, Webb replied. Integration, education, responsible development. The technology is just tools. It's the wisdom to use them properly that matters most. Natidi. Through the facility's external cameras, they could see the Prometheus group forces withdrawing, their leadership apparently recognizing that their paradigm of control through secrecy had ended. A new chapter was beginning, one that would require different approaches to power and progress. Mitch thought about his farm in Montana, about the foreclosure notice that had driven him to that desperate morning excavation. That crisis had been the catalyst, but he understood now that it had never really been about saving the land. It had been about preparing him for this moment, stripping away everything that might have prevented him from taking the leap of faith required to activate his grandfather's legacy. The farm, Novak said, as if reading his thoughts. The financial trust your grandfather established, it's fully activated now. Not just your property, but all the Guardian families will be secure. Resources to help with the transition, to establish education centers, to ensure this knowledge is shared responsibly. Mitch nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond personal concerns. Through the network connection, he could feel the excitement and trepidation of people worldwide as they began to grasp the implications of what had been revealed. The challenges ahead would be enormous, but so were the possibilities. The Nexus had fulfilled its purpose as an activation center, but its role was evolving. It would become a coordination hub, a place where the wisdom of the past could meet, the aspirations of the future, and the Patriarch Network, no longer hidden, would serve as humanity's guide into a new era of cosmic citizenship. As alarms finally fell silent and systems stabilized, Mitch turned to look once more at the sphere that had been the focus of so much sacrifice and patience. Its gentle pulsing seemed to match his heartbeat, a reminder that technology and consciousness, properly aligned, could create possibilities beyond current imagination. His grandfather's patient faith had been vindicated. The desperate farmer who had fixed an old radio had indeed intercepted a message that brought the CIA to his door. But more importantly, he had answered a call that echoed across generations, connecting past wisdom with future potential. The activation was complete, but the journey was just beginning. And Mitch Hawthorne, veteran, farmer, and guardian of humanity's expanded heritage, was ready to help lead the way forward. 6 months after the activation of the Nexus, Mitch Hawthorne stood in the renovated barn on his Montana property, watching as the final pieces of equipment were installed in what would become the Northern Plains Patriarch Integration Center. The contrast with that desperate morning when he'd first intercepted the coded message couldn't have been more stark. Where rusty farm implements had once gathered dust, state-of-the-art communication arrays and holographic teaching systems now hummed with purpose. The last quantum resonance calibrator is in place, announced Dr. Amelia Foster, a young physicist who had been among the first wave of researchers to join the integration effort. We're fully synchronized with the global network. Mitch nodded, still adjusting to his role as the coordinator for the Northwestern United States Patriarch transition. The foreclosure notice that had once threatened everything now sat framed on his office wall, a reminder of how desperate circumstances could catalyze extraordinary transformations. Through the barn's newly installed panoramic windows, he could see vehicles arriving for the day's orientation session. Farmers, teachers, engineers, and curious citizens from across Montana and neighboring states came to learn about the technologies and philosophies that had been hidden for so long. The integration was proceeding faster than anyone had anticipated, driven by humanity's inherent hunger for knowledge and connection. Director Hawthorne called Sarah Chen, his administrative assistant and a former Air Force communications specialist. Agent Novak is on the secure line from Washington. She says it's urgent. Mitch moved to his office, a converted tack room that now housed advanced communication equipment. Diane Novak's face appeared on the holographic display, her expression carrying the mix of excitement and concern that had become familiar over the past months. Mitch, we've detected something unexpected, she began without preamble. The resonance network isn't just facilitating communication between our sites. It's picking up signals from similar networks on other continents, networks we didn't know existed. The implications were immediate and profound. If Patriarch had sister networks in other regions, it meant the original architects had implemented an even more comprehensive system than they'd realized. Where are these signals originating? Mitch asked, his mind already racing through possibilities. Initially, we detected responses from the Himalayas, the Andes, and Central Africa, Novak explained. But in the last hour, we've identified at least 12 distinct network signatures worldwide. Mitch, it appears Patriarch was just one component of a global grid. Before he could respond, Dr. Marcus Webb's voice joined the conversation, his image appearing alongside Novak's. Despite his age, Webb had thrown himself into the integration effort with remarkable energy, serving as the historical liaison for the project. This aligns with references in the oldest documents, Webb added excitedly, mentions of sister sanctuaries and harmonic parallels that we couldn't fully interpret. The activation of our network may have triggered a cascade effect, awakening dormant systems across the planet. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through his office window, Mitch saw a group of Blackfeet tribal elders arriving, led by Thomas Crowfeather, a respected spiritual leader who had become a crucial advisor to the integration project. I need to go, Mitch told Novak and Webb. The Tribal Council is here for our weekly coordination meeting. Keep monitoring those signals and prepare a full briefing for tonight's Guardian Conference. As he disconnected, Mitch reflected on how natural it had become to balance cutting-edge technology with ancient wisdom. The Blackfeet Nation, whose reservation bordered his property, had revealed their own carefully preserved knowledge that, complemented the patriarch materials. Their oral traditions, it turned out, contained precise astronomical and geological information that helped calibrate the resonance systems. Outside, Thomas Crowfeather greeted him with the warm familiarity that had grown between them. "The ancestors spoke in our dreams last night," the elder said without preamble. "They say the Great Awakening has begun, but warned that the first test approaches." Mitch had learned to take such pronouncements seriously. Indigenous knowledge. Keepers worldwide had reported similar prophetic insights since the activation, their traditional practices proving remarkably compatible with the quantum consciousness interfaces. "What kind of test?" Mitch asked as they walked toward the meeting hall, a new structure built with a combination of traditional architectural principles and resonance-enhancing materials. "A choice," Crowfeather replied thoughtfully, "between the old ways of power and the new path of harmony." The dreams showed two rivers converging, one carrying the past's burdens, the other flowing toward tomorrow's possibilities. Inside the meeting hall, representatives from various stakeholder groups had already gathered. The integration process had naturally evolved into a collaborative governance model, with decisions made through consensus rather than hierarchy. It was, Mitch often thought, exactly what his grandfather had envisioned, wisdom emerging from the intersection of diverse perspectives. Dr. Elena Vasquez, leading the medical applications team, was first to report. "The resonance healing protocols are showing remarkable results. We're seeing tissue regeneration rates that conventional medicine considered impossible. But more significantly, patients report enhanced awareness of their body's natural healing processes." "Similar results in agriculture," added Ben Patterson, a local farmer who had volunteered his land for testing. "Crops grown within resonance fields show increased yield and nutritional density. But it's the soil itself that's most interesting. Microbial activity has increased threefold, creating self-sustaining fertility cycles." The meeting continued, with updates from various teams, each reporting breakthroughs that would have seemed like science fiction mere months ago. Yet alongside the excitement, there was a growing awareness of the challenges that came with such rapid change. "We're receiving pushback from several pharmaceutical companies," reported James Rodriguez, the project's legal advisor. "They're claiming patent infringement on processes that predate their existence by centuries, and 3 energy conglomerates have filed injunctions to prevent deployment of the magnetic field generators." Mitch wasn't surprised. The Prometheus Group's direct assault had failed, but the interests they represented hadn't simply vanished. Instead, they had shifted to legal and economic tactics, attempting to control or delay technologies that threatened established power structures. "Let them file their papers," Thomas Crowfeather said calmly. "You cannot patent sunrise or claim ownership of wind. These gifts belong to all people." The elder's words sparked a discussion about the project's core philosophy. From the beginning, they had committed to open-source distribution of all patriarch knowledge, ensuring no entity could monopolize these advances. The legal challenges were annoying but ultimately futile against the momentum of freely shared information. As the meeting progressed, Mitch's secure communicator vibrated with an urgent message from the Nexus facility. Dr. Webb's face appeared on the small screen, his expression grave. "Mitch, you need to see this immediately. We've decoded the first complete transmission from one of the sister networks. It's significant." Excusing himself from the meeting, Mitch moved to the facility's quantum communication chamber. The holographic display showed a complex pattern of symbols and energy signatures emanating from coordinates in the Tibetan plateau. "What am I looking at?" he asked as Webb's image materialized beside the data stream. "A warning," Webb replied solemnly. And an invitation. The Tibetan network has been active far longer than ours, possibly continuously since ancient times. They're reporting that our activation has triggered something called the Convergence Protocol. The display shifted to show a global map with pulsing nodes representing each awakened network. Lines of energy connected them in an intricate geometric pattern that seemed to breathe with life. According to their transmission, when networks on all inhabited continents activate simultaneously, it initiates a planetary consciousness upgrade. But there's a critical window. We have approximately 72 hours to achieve full synchronization, or the opportunity won't arise again. For another full 32 years. Mitch studied the data, his mind working through the implications. What happens if we achieve synchronization? Based on their description, humanity would gain access to what they call the Akashic Interface, a quantum information field, containing the collective knowledge and experience of not just our species, but of all consciousness throughout the universe. The scope was almost incomprehensible. Yet after everything he'd witnessed since that morning with his grandfather's radio, Mitch had learned not to dismiss possibilities simply because they challenged conventional understanding. "What do we need to do?" he asked. "Each network must complete its regional integration and then link with the others in a specific sequence," Webb explained. "The process requires precise timing and coordination. But there's a complication. 2 networks in South America and Antarctica haven't fully activated. Without them, global synchronization is impossible." Mitch felt the weight of urgency settle onto his shoulders. The Guardian network had come so far, overcome so many obstacles, only to face this ultimate challenge with a ticking clock. "Get me connections to every active network coordinator," he ordered, "and find out everything we can about the dormant sites. If we have 72 hours to change human destiny, we're not wasting a second." The next 3 days became a blur of frantic activity. The Hawthorne farm transformed into a global command center as coordinators from every active network established quantum communication links. The diversity was remarkable. An Aboriginal elder from Australia, a quantum physicist from the European, Sight, a Maori navigator from New Zealand, a Dogon astronomer from Mali, each bringing unique perspectives that enriched their understanding. The South American network, they discovered, had been damaged during political upheavals in the 1970s. Its guardians had maintained partial function but lacked the resources for full restoration. Within hours, an international team was assembled and dispatched with equipment and expertise. Antarctica presented a different challenge. The network site was located beneath miles of ice, accessible only through treacherous conditions that had worsened with recent storms. The solution came from an unexpected source. The Russian coordinator revealed that their military had maintained a secret research station near the Antarctic site since the Soviet era. "My grandfather was part of the original Patriarch infiltration," Svetlana Volkov explained via holographic link, "but he chose to protect rather than exploit. We've been waiting for the right moment to reveal our involvement." With Russian logistical support, a team reached the Antarctic site with 36 hours remaining. The ancient installation, preserved in the ice like a frozen time capsule, activated with surprising ease once the proper protocols were applied. As networks came online and synchronized, Mitch began to experience something unprecedented. The consciousness link he'd felt during the initial activation expanded exponentially. He could sense not just the other Guardians, but flashes of awareness from people worldwide who were naturally attuning to the rising frequencies. "It's beginning," Thomas Crowfeather observed during a brief respite. "The dreaming and waking worlds are converging. Soon, there will be no separation between what we imagine and what we can achieve." With 12 hours remaining, only the South American network remained partially offline. The repair team reported progress, but warned they needed more time to complete the delicate restoration. "We can establish a temporary bridge," suggested Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Japanese Coordination Center. "Our network can extend its field to create a harmonic bypass. It won't be perfect, but it might be enough." The solution required tremendous power and precise calibration. Networks worldwide contributed energy to the effort, creating a resonance bridge that spanned continents. As the connection stabilized with mere minutes to spare, the global grid achieved full integration. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Mitch felt his consciousness expand beyond individual awareness into something vast and interconnected. Information flowed freely, not just data, but understanding, empathy, and shared purpose. He could perceive the hopes and fears of billions, the accumulated wisdom of civilizations, the potential futures branching before humanity like infinite pathways. Around the world, similar experiences unfolded. In cities and villages, laboratories and temples, people suddenly found themselves connected to a vast web of consciousness that transcended all boundaries. Language barriers dissolved as meaning, transmitted directly. Cultural misunderstandings evaporated in the face of shared experience. Solutions to seemingly intractable problems emerged from the collective intelligence now accessible to all. The Akashic Interface, as the Tibetan network had termed it, proved to be more than just a repository of knowledge. It was a living framework for evolutionary growth, offering not just information but wisdom, the understanding of how to apply knowledge beneficially. As the initial overwhelming sensation stabilized into a sustainable connection, Mitch found himself back in his coordination center, surrounded by colleagues who were similarly adjusting to their expanded awareness. "The corporate lawsuits have been withdrawn," James Rodriguez reported, a bemused expression on his face. Apparently, the executives experienced the convergence and immediately recognized the futility of trying to control something that belongs to everyone. Dr. Vasquez was reviewing incoming medical data with tears in her eyes. "We're seeing spontaneous remissions across multiple conditions. It's as if the collective healing knowledge is actively seeking out those in need." Outside, the Montana landscape looked the same, yet felt profoundly different. The resonance field had become a permanent feature of reality, invisible yet tangible to those attuned to its presence. The boundary between technology and nature had blurred, revealing them as complementary aspects of a greater whole. Diane Novak's holographic image appeared, but she seemed different, more present somehow, as if the quantum communication system now carried more than just visual data. "Mitch, the integration has exceeded every projection," she reported. "But this is just the beginning. We're detecting signals from beyond our solar system. It seems we've joined a much larger network." The revelation, which might once have been shocking, now felt natural. Of course, consciousness would network across cosmic distances. Of course, there would be other civilizations facing similar evolutionary transitions. The patriarch legacy had prepared humanity for precisely this moment, not just preserving ancient knowledge, but positioning the species to take its place in a universal community. Thomas Crowfeather joined Mitch on the observation deck as sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. "The prophecies spoke true," the elder said quietly. "The two rivers have merged. We carry forward the wisdom of our ancestors while flowing toward futures they could only dream." Mitch thought about his grandfather, about the patient faith required to maintain secrets across generations, trusting that the right moment would eventually arrive. The desperate morning when he'd intercepted that coded message seemed like another lifetime, yet it had been less than a year. "What happens now?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Now we grow," Crowfeather replied. "We learn to use these gifts wisely. We heal what has been broken and build what has been envisioned. The hardest work lies ahead, but we face it together as one people with many voices." The Integration Center had evolved beyond its original purpose. No longer just a facility for disseminating recovered knowledge, it had become a template for a new kind of human institution, one that balanced individual achievement with collective wisdom, technological advancement with spiritual growth, local autonomy with global coordination. Across the planet, similar transformations were taking place. The competitive paradigms that had driven human development for millennia were giving way to collaborative models that accomplished more while demanding less. Problems that had seemed insurmountable, climate change, resource scarcity, social inequality, were being addressed with solutions that emerged from the collective intelligence now available to all. Yet challenges remained. Not everyone adapted easily to the new paradigm. Some clung to old power structures, fearing loss of control or significance. Others struggled with the psychological adjustment to expanded awareness. The integration centers worldwide took on new roles as support systems, helping people navigate the transition at their own pace. Mitch's position had evolved as well. No longer just a coordinator for the Northwest region, he found himself serving as a bridge between the original Patriarch Guardians and the emerging global consciousness network. His journey from desperate farmer to planetary facilitator exemplified the transformative potential that had always existed within the human species, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest. On the first anniversary of the convergence, a celebration was held simultaneously across all network sites. In Montana, the gathering drew thousands to witness the dedication of the Mitchell Hawthorne Memorial Center for Consciousness Studies, built on the land that had nearly been lost to foreclosure. Dr. Marcus Webb, looking younger somehow despite his years, gave the keynote address. "We stand at the threshold of a new chapter in human evolution," he declared. "Not because we've gained new abilities, but because we've remembered who we always were, a species capable of transcending limitation through unity while honoring the diversity that makes us strong." The celebration included demonstrations of the technologies and practices that had emerged from the integration. Children who had grown up with access to the consciousness network displayed abilities that would have been considered superhuman a generation earlier, not because they were genetically different, but because they had never learned the artificial limitations that had constrained human potential. As night fell, a global meditation linked all celebration sites. Billions of minds joined in a shared moment of gratitude and intention, creating a resonance wave that registered on instruments across the planet and beyond. The signal, it was later confirmed, had been detected by observatories throughout the galaxy, humanity's announcement that it had taken its first steps toward cosmic citizenship. Mitch stood with his extended family, both biological relatives and the global network of guardians who had become like kin. His grandfather's radio, now displayed in the Memorial Center, represented both an ending and a beginning. The coded message that had brought CIA agents to his door had ultimately brought humanity to its own doorstep, inviting the species to finally come home to its larger identity. Looking up at the stars, now understood as gateways rather than barriers, Mitch reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The intercepted transmission had indeed contained a message that changed everything, not through the information it carried, but through the response it awakened in those ready to hear its call. The farm was saved, the foreclosure a distant memory. But more importantly, a future had been secured, one where the artificial divisions between science and spirituality, individual and collective, human and cosmic, had dissolved into a unified field of infinite possibility. As bonfires blazed and music filled the night air, Mitch raised a toast to his grandfather's foresight, to Agent Novak's trust, to Dr. Webb's persistence, and to all the guardians who had maintained faith across generations. But most of all, he toasted to the continuing journey, for the activation of the network had not been an end, but a beginning. The next morning would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new opportunities to apply the wisdom they had inherited and the knowledge they continued to uncover. The desperate farmer who had fixed an old radio had become a shepherd of human potential, helping guide the species toward a destiny written in the stars, yet grounded in the soil of Earth. The code had been broken, the message received, and the response transmitted across the cosmos. Humanity was ready to remember who it was and claim its place in the greater community of consciousness that had been patiently waiting for this moment of awakening. And in the quantum field that now connected all minds, a subtle vibration carried the essence of Samuel Hawthorne's original faith, that someday, when the time was right, his grandson would fix that old radio and change the world simply by listening to what it had to say. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.